Hi, everyone. Hope you're having a good Sunday. I know that a lot of you are feeling a little anxiety right now. Whether you're having a nice Sunday or not, you are worried about what's going on in Iran. And to be honest, some of you message me privately saying you don't understand the personalities, politics, or dynamics in the region well enough to really assess for yourself how what is happening and how you even feel about these activities. So I thought I would bring you a conversation with somebody who can help break down the who, what, why, and how of it all. Marie Harf. Marie, first of all, thank you for being here and for taking the time on a Sunday.
I'm thrilled to be here. I woke up yesterday morning also feeling anxiety and like I had a lot of questions about what's going on. So it'll be nice to talk about it with you and with
Uh,
people watching.
that's very honest of you and I'm humble. So, for a little context, Marie's questions might be different from most of ours. She is a former CIA analyst who specialized in the Middle East, a former State Department spokesperson, and she was the comms lead on the Iran nuclear deal when John Kerry was running it. She is also now a Fox News contributor. So she has a picture of the broad US politics on this and the politics of the Middle East. So, Marie, I thought we'd get right into it, considering the current state of play in Iran. If you look at what the US and Israel have targeted, missile infrastructure, drone production sites, naval facilities, and crucially, Iranian leadership, including the supreme leader, the Ayatollah himself. What does that target list tell you about this strategy and what the US and Israel are trying to do in Iran?
Well, Jessica, what it tells me is that this was a regime change operation, that the goal wasn't just hitting the nuclear facilities. They did that last summer, right? If we remember, the US and Israel hit Iran's nuclear facilities last summer. This was a decapitation targeting package that the US and Israel did. And that's very significant. I mean, going into another country and killing their leader, even if that leader's a really bad guy, which don't get me wrong, the supreme leader was a very, very bad person who had a lot of American and Israeli blood on his hands. But that's a very significant thing to do. Basically, it's the most significant military action you can take short of an all out ground invasion, like we saw with Iraq. So, what it says to me is that the Israelis and the US want a new regime in Tehran. And a lot of people, I think, want that. I want a democratic, free Iran. For those of us who've watched just the past few months, the Iranian regime's real brutality towards protesters who were rising up asking for more freedom. We want a new regime there. I think the biggest question on the table for all of us today is whether the military action the US and Israel have taken can actually get us to that goal. That is a big question I know we'll talk about, but that's what the goal is. I think a new regime in Iran that doesn't threaten Israel, doesn't threaten the US or our allies in the region.
And we will get back to that question you raised. Let's look at the other side of the picture, which is that Iran's retaliation could have taken many forms, and we're expecting still more retaliation. So we'll learn. But some of their initial strikes hit Gulf countries that are
Mhm.
host US bases, but also haven't been part of this operation. They hit Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, UAE, Jordan. Now, they didn't just target military sites there, they targeted civilian sites. They hit a hotel, they hit two airports. That was a
Mhm.
surprise and it's consequential. So, would you explain to us what is the significance of the fact that they hit these targets and what might it lead to?
Yeah, this is a great question. If you remember last year when the US and Israel hit Iran, Iran didn't really retaliate very much. They sent some missiles towards Israel, they were intercepted, right? They really, I think, did not retaliate because they knew that they were quite weak and the US and Israel had much more power than they did. We knew heading into this conflict, Iranian leaders were saying publicly, if you attack us now, and especially if you attack our leaders, if you kill the head of our country, we are going to go after things you care about military bases in the region, Israel, and as you said, civilian targets in the Gulf. I mean, if you go to the UAE or Kuwait or Qatar or even Oman or Jordan, these are countries that for the large part are very safe. And that's their whole shtick. It's
Yeah.
that, these are safe places people can go on vacation, they can make money. I mean, there's a ton of business flowing through the Gulf, and that they've been somewhat protected from the larger chaos in the region. The Iranians are saying, not so fast, right? We can hit you where it hurts. And the Iranians can't compete with us or Israel militarily, and they know that. But what they can do is they can fire a lot of missiles, they have a lot of drones, and they can do asymmetrical things really well. And I don't want to scare people. I think that these are threats that all of these countries can certainly counter. But the Iranians are weak, and weak countries that are at risk of other countries attacking them, that's often when they're the most dangerous, when they
Hmm.
feel pushed back into a corner. And so I would expect more, I think, to happen in the coming days. We'll see, but that's what I would expect.
Well, they've said that their fiercest retaliation is yet to come, so we're
Right.
all waiting for that. But I want to follow up on the Gulf countries really quickly, which is, by targeting these Gulf nations, Iran is basically daring them into the war, right? Like Saudi, Bahrain, Kuwait, they were not aggressors in this conflict, but they could become aggressors now that Iran has done this. They have their own reasons for wanting this regime gone. Would you just help us
Mhm.
understand if they do respond, what happens, and why might they actually want to?
Yeah, I mean, the Gulf countries, so Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, none of them like Iran very much because Iran is a bad actor in the region and they foment chaos and unrest uh, all across the region. We've seen this whether it was in Iraq during the height of the US war there, whether it's in Lebanon, Syria. Yemen. So Iran is a bad actor. People don't like them. I will be very curious if the Gulf countries actually get involved. There's some
Hmm.
reporting out today, I think, from the Washington Post that the head of Saudi Arabia, the young leader Mohammed bin Salman, was actually quietly pushing the Trump administration to take this action. There is no love lost with Iran. The challenge the Gulf countries have is they don't like Iran. They think it's a threat, but they also don't like chaos and instability. So if this war can end soon, if they can put Iran in a box where they're not threatening the Gulf, I don't think that they'll get directly involved. But
Hmm.
if this continues and you see civilians dying in downtown Dubai, that's a very different story. I actually don't think that will happen, but that's something to watch for.
Right. Yeah. That would be a really bad outcome. Let's
Yes.
talk for a moment about the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has effectively closed it, told major shippers don't use these waterways. What is the significance of that? And yeah, and how might that impact people here at home?
Well, number one, go fill up your gas tanks right
Yeah.
now because
I
I filled mine
literally
up.
did that on my way back to do this interview. Yeah.
I did it yesterday. I mean, it sounds flip, but it's true. The biggest impact is oil.
Yeah.
Iran has a lot of oil. Obviously, we don't buy their oil, but countries like China do, and they can impact the global oil supply and they can help drive prices up. So that's not always a immediate effect, but if a lot of oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz, they can impact international shipping in general, right? A lot of commerce goes through there, and they could make things more expensive and make it more difficult to get things.
Right. And
Certainly.
we're gonna see when the market opens on Monday how
That's
this
right.
is going to get priced into the market and it'll hit the global economy. I did read that OPEC is having an emergency meeting this week to see if they can, increase production to balance it all out. But closing the Strait of Hormuz would definitely impact gas prices over the long
That's right. And look, oil's been actually pretty low,
run.
historically speaking. Gas prices obviously have been fluctuating, but it hasn't been at a high, but it can definitely go there. So that's definitely a place to watch. You're right when the markets open on Monday.
Okay, let's talk about the Ayatollah. For
Mm.
people who have seen images of Iranians cheering his death, help us understand what is happening inside Iran. Why are so many protesters thrilled that their leader was killed by the US? Who is he? What did he represent? And why are some other people bemoaning his death?
Right. I mean, we've seen people celebrating in Los Angeles, in London, in Toronto. Think about when Saddam Hussein was killed. Finally, after a trial, actually in Iraq, but when he was captured and then killed, the Ayatollah is a bad guy, was a bad guy. The supreme leader had Iranian blood on his hands, American, Israeli, other countries. He presided over an authoritarian regime that deprived its people of basic human rights and freedoms. And so there is no love lost for many people that he's gone. I mean, think about when the Taliban was overthrown or when Gaddafi was overthrown. These are bad guys. So there are a lot of people today that are happy that he is dead. He was also quite old and not in very good health. So we've been talking, those of us who watch Iran really closely, for some time about when he might pass and the succession plan. He was only the second supreme leader in the history of Iran, and served as the ultimate head of government and the clerical head of the country. So it's a theocracy, right? Iran is a country run by hardline Shia clerical leaders. And that's why when we talk about women's rights, when we talk about whether women can go outside unveiled, when we talk about the kinds of freedoms protesters have been fighting for, they're pushing back against these mullahs, against the ayatollahs. The big question now is who comes next. And he has been in power for decades. There are a lot of other power centers in Iran that we can talk about, but this was a strike designed to decapitate the head of the regime and to throw them into some chaos. They've been planning for this for a while, by the way. They thought this might happen, but there are people who are also sad. I mean, if you look at, there are some Iranians who, and the regime is putting some of this propaganda out, right? They're putting
Mm.
these videos out, but there are some in Iran who, even if they didn't love him, are sad that their leader has been killed and don't like the fact that the United States did it with bombs.
Right,
So it's
right.
complicated, right?
Let's talk about what you referenced, which is the succession plan. So
Mhm.
every smart Middle East analyst I've spoken to or heard from in the last, I don't know, many months has said there is no clear succession plan. The US doesn't know who would be next. And I've heard reports in the last 24 hours of different people who are
Mhm.
in charge. So there does seem to be some confusion, at least outside. Would you explain? There are two main power centers. There are many power centers, but the two main power centers, the clerical establishment and the IRGC, which is also known as the Revolutionary Guard. One is
Mhm.
the religious leaders, and then the military leaders. How are they different? And there's fear that this conflict could actually consolidate the power of the military wing. Why would that be a bad outcome?
Well, that would be a bad outcome because the military wing, the IRGC, and their domestic counterpart are the ones responsible for some of the worst atrocities that the Islamic regime has perpetrated over many decades at home, in terms of killing protesters, and overseas, in terms of killing people in the region and American service members in Iraq, for example. There is one possible outcome here, that when a country's attacked from another, power, people tend to close ranks. They, even if there's chaos, even if there's some uncertainty, they tend to close ranks around the people that are left, the leaders that are left. There has been an interim supreme leader named. There is a process in the Iranian constitution to form a three-person body to determine the future leadership. That body has now been formed. We forget that even though Iran is an autocratic government, it does have some politics and some processes. It has a majlis, it has a parliament, has an elected president. The elected president was not killed. He doesn't have as much power as the supreme leader or the IRGC, but the president was not killed. He is still there. A lot of IRGC leaders were killed, but not all of them. So they are still a power center. And the clerics, of course, are still there. So I think what you will see is some jockeying at the top. There are a handful of names, not household names to any of us, but a handful of names of people who have sort of stepped into this moment, who appear to have broad support to at least lead in the interim in some way from those different constituencies. And we're going to see a process in the next few days and weeks and months of how they do succession. If they don't do it well, if they don't name a supreme leader quickly, if they don't coalesce, that's an indication that regime collapse may be on on the table here, maybe in the cards.
Hmm.
If they do, you'll have taken out the supreme leader, but the regime will remain intact, sort of like Venezuela, where the
Right.
regime stayed intact, but Maduro was gone. So we just don't know which will happen yet.
And and that's one of the big things to watch for is who becomes leader. Is there a battle for that role?
Right.
Um, I also want to sort of caveat something you said, which is that the leader might have broad support. It would be broad support among the elites. I mean, it's still the case that about 81% of the Iranian people do not support this regime. Can you
Yes.
elaborate on that?
That's an excellent point. Yes. Thank you for making my point better than I did. You're absolutely right. Among the elites, among people with power. But what I don't think is a likely outcome is that somehow the regime will completely collapse
Right.
and a democratic protester led coalition government will take its place. The regime still has the guns and the protesters don't. And they have shown themselves very willing to use force to maintain power. So while I wish that we would wake up a month from now and there were elections in Iran and there was a interim government led by people committed to democracy, I just don't think that's in the cards. But you are right. One thing to look for, one thing we should look for is whether there are mass protests in the streets. We have seen them. The biggest protest in the history of the Islamic Republic this year. Will they take to the streets again? Will that put pressure on, even if it's the same regime, to maybe not be quite as bad, to maybe start opening up a little bit? Not revolution, but evolution
Mm.
of the regime? That's something to watch for, certainly.
For folks who aren't aware, I just want to make this sort of level set. When she's saying that this IRGC is quite brutal, they reportedly killed 30,000 of their own protesters in 3 days
Mhm.
earlier this year. Those are
Mhm.
mostly kids under the age of 25 who took to the streets and they gunned down 30,000 of their own kids in their country. They're also the IRGC. Correct me if I'm wrong, Marie. They helped supply the IEDs that killed
Mm,
600 US troops in Iraq. They provide
absolutely.
drones for Russia in Ukraine. Um, what are some of the other? They've armed the Taliban, and then not to mention Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis.
Assad, Assad in Syria when he was still in power.
Yeah, they
They're like every bad guy they like to support,
and
basically.
and they're basically like the central bank for terrorism around the globe.
Yes.
So they're sort of this hub of terror threats in much of the globe. And so there's plenty of reason for outside forces to want the IRGC um, to be undermined or have a new leader, or I don't know, go away.
No, that's right. And it was interesting when President Trump said to the military of Iran, including the IRGC, you have immunity if you lay down your weapons and turn yourself in. Who are they supposed to turn themselves into? We don't have American forces there like we did
Right.
in Iraq. I think it appears to be a lesson he learned from Iraq when we didn't do that and we
Oh,
punished, right? I think he got in his head that like in Iraq we punished all the former Saddam low-level soldiers and that really ended up coming back to hurt us. And so now he's saying they can have immunity, but who do they turn their guns into?
one thing I had heard, and I'm curious your explanation for this, is that because of the sanctions on Iran, there's really an economic vice over, the
Mhm.
IRGC. Everybody is struggling there. And that IRGC paychecks might not be getting cashed. And so there was
Mm.
this hope that the IRGC would somehow defect or turn to side with the protesters. Is that even a real possibility?
You mean it's all about affordability even in
Yeah.
Iran? Um,
That.
uh, um, Iran is in an incredibly difficult economic situation because of a ton of sanctions that are in place on them. The people that tend to always get paid first is the IRGC and the regime and their cronies. So if there is money to be made, I think the IRGC is probably still getting it.
Okay.
But look, that is an interesting theory. I mean, I think there have been real questions about whether Iranians would kill other Iranians in large numbers. And as you said, we saw that earlier this year. 30,000 is probably a conservative estimate.
Mm.
So I think we should just have some humility with how easy it will be to convince people that have spent their entire lives fighting for a cause. The US just took out their leader and is bombing their country, including someone accidentally, I think, bombing a girls' school, we have to have a little humility about the fact that they might greet us as liberators, to
Right.
quote Paul Wolfowitz and Donald Rumsfeld from Iraq.
So the US administration, the Trump administration, has said there will be no US boots on the ground. Do you believe that? And is regime change possible without that?
Do I believe it? That's a good question. I believe that Donald Trump likes the use of tactical military power and actually does not appear interested in long-term, drawn-out, boots on the ground wars. I think I still believe that. We'll see. Also thought he wasn't going to get us into any new wars, and that has turned out to not be the case. But I don't think they are interested in putting boots on the ground. They want to do this with air power alone and intelligence and all of that. No, I think there is no example in history that air power alone can overthrow an entire regime. In Iraq, we did it. In Afghanistan, we did it with hundreds of thousands of troops over almost 20 years. And neither of them have turned out to be successful pro US democracies in their entirety. Iraq is certainly better than Afghanistan, but you can kill a lot of military leaders with airstrikes. It is very, very difficult without protesters or another force on the ground of actual people from the country that can rise up. It's very difficult to overthrow a government just from the air.
Yeah.
It's just not, I don't have examples of it working.
Mhm.
So maybe we'll get lucky here and it will. But even if it were to work, I want to, Jessica, this is so important. Even if it were to work and the regime were to collapse, what comes up in its place? We have no guarantee that it would be more pro US, more peaceful, more open to freedom for its own people.
But so why would we do this?
Hmm.
I know
Yeah,
you can't speak for the Trump administration, but if you're like analyzing the Israeli position here, why are they interested if they can't guarantee a better regime, a friendlier regime?
I think it's a question about the devil you know versus the devil you don't. And it is true that the supreme leader and this Iranian government were very dangerous. It was interesting when President Trump gave his taped remarks on Saturday. He talked about things that happened 47 years ago, the Iranian Revolution, the takeover of the embassy, the Beirut bombing. These are things that have worked their way into the American and Israeli kind of myth, right? And narrative and psyche that Iran is a threat, and they are, that this regime was built on saying death to America and death to Israel. That's all true. So, on the one hand, decapitating their leadership has the potential to make both countries safer. And I think some people feel like it's justice. I wouldn't use those words, but I've heard people say, well, this is justice for all of those people that the Iranian regime has killed over the years. Um, I don't think that that's good policy for a number of reasons, or including legal reasons. But I think there's just been this narrative for so many years. And I think importantly, they don't have nuclear weapons yet.
Right.
North Korea, in some ways, is more protected from American military action because they have a nuclear deterrent.
Right.
And I think why now? You know, you said why now? Iran was really weak. They're the weakest they've been since the revolution 47 years ago. Israel and the US decimating their groups they fund in the region, Hamas, Hezbollah. Last summer, they did a real number. They did real damage to Iran's military capabilities. So Iran was weak. And it was a moment where I think Israel and the US said, okay, we can actually take this regime down. They had an opportunity. It was a war of choice, but they took that opportunity.
You know, you have worked on diplomacy. You worked on the Iran nuclear deal and you made the case that diplomacy could work. Obviously, the administration says they tried to negotiate and Iran wouldn't meet their terms. From where you sit, someone who believed in that path, what went wrong? And Trump says that the current leadership, for what it is, wants to talk. So do you think there's a diplomatic off ramp here, or are we really past that?
I think there are some indications that there are leaders in Iran willing to negotiate a ceasefire. That's one kind of talking. They don't want bombs to continue falling for weeks on end. That's one type of negotiation. It is hard for me to imagine how they could trust the US when we were at a negotiating table claiming to keep talking and then bombing them at the same time. So that is not great for our credibility. Where did we go wrong? I think there were a lot of people that never believed that diplomacy could work with Iran. And when we got the nuclear deal done, it shipped all of their nuclear material out of the country. We had inspectors crawling through every nuclear facility. We had cameras. It didn't mean that we trusted them, but we had a level of transparency that guaranteed if they tried to cheat, we would see it. And if we could do deals with the Soviet Union at the height of the Cold War, if we could do that, do arms deals, which we did, and they held for a long time. I just think there are a lot of people in this country, especially in Congress and on the right side of the aisle, who just never thought that Iran could be trusted to uphold their end of the deal. Not trusted, but could be held in compliance to a diplomatic agreement. And the only option was military action. And it's just been this bugaboo for them. And it's really, I don't want to say painful. I mean, that sounds too emotional, right? But the Iran nuclear deal demonstrated that we could solve a security threat through diplomacy. It wasn't perfect, but it was really good. And all of the things the Trump team is talking about today when they were in the negotiations with Iran, oh, we can ship all the material out of Iran. All those things were in the original deal. All
Yeah.
of them. And Trump tore it up because Obama did it and because his team just thought Iran could never be trusted, period, full stop. And that military conflict was always the ultimate aim. I genuinely believe that.
Yeah. No, I hear that, and that's the debate people have to this moment is, can they be trusted? Can diplomacy work? Obviously, this administration has a very strong view on that, which they've expressed in the last 24 hours. Let me ask
That's
you
right.
a question the audience keeps putting to me, and so I am going to ask it of you. Is this World War III?
No,
Why not?
I don't think so. And I'm not naive and I'm not Pollyannish, I promise. Um, because I think that many people involved in the conflict actually don't want it to escalate further. Look, I think if the US and Iran, I don't think they're talking about boots on the ground, first of all. I don't think anyone's talking about a land invasion, a land war in the Middle East. I think the US and Israel actually, now that the supreme leader is dead, I think this could last days, maybe weeks, not longer. The Gulf countries certainly have no incentive for this to continue. And I don't see other major powers getting involved. Sure, the Chinese and the Russians support Iran. It was so great seeing Vladimir Putin criticizing American military action. It's rich to hear him talk about how that's a violation of international norms, right? But I don't see other great powers getting involved here. And that's what world wars look like, right? I think this is a regional conflict that a lot of people want to not escalate further.
Let's talk about how Iran could retaliate beyond what we've seen so far.
Mhm.
I've been asked, can Iran bomb the US? And I've explained to folks, no, they don't have the capability to launch a strike that would hit the US homeland. But there are other ways they could inflict damage here in the US, uh, inside the US. Would you talk about some of their capabilities?
Sure. And without raising people's anxiety levels, I certainly don't want to do that on a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah,
But, you know, the Iranians are good in the cyberspace, right? So they're not as good as Russia or North Korea, but they could do cyber attacks on the US in some way. Now they don't have huge capabilities like to take down entire power grids or anything like that, but they could try and mess around in the cyberspace, number one.
like
Um,
take out ATMs, that kind of thing.
Yeah, or like take Twitter offline, or maybe that's not a good example anymore. But
We would cheer. Yeah,
yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, that would be good, fine by me. But we've seen them play around on our social media with propaganda,
I see.
um, things like that, things like that.
Okay.
And but I think also they would probably target. We've seen state actors target like U.S. government accounts, right? Try and hack
Mhm.
into the State Department or something. We know that Iran has tried to do that. They also look, they have in the region and in certainly in Europe, they have proxies who they could be looking at terrorist attacks, right? And again, I'm not trying to scare people. I don't think that the threat level here in the US is particularly high. Um, the Iranians have never been able to carry out attacks inside the United States, but I think that is certainly something they could try to do. I think though there will be a decision by their leadership. This is what my guess is, that they don't want to escalate like that.
Mm,
I just I don't get this sense that I think they'll hit American targets in the region. And I think that I hope the US government, including DHS, which has been obviously focused on other things than terrorism, international terrorism for the most part under this administration, but I hope they are laser focused on the potential that Iran could try and send some bad guy to the US to do something. What I'm actually less worried about are people Iran sends. I'm just worried about people that get radicalized online, right?
yeah,
Quote, lone wolves who just see something online and are mad at the US and want to do something bad.
yeah, yeah. I agree. It's not worth ruining your
No.
stomach acid over and like getting, up all night over and getting extremely overwrought, but it's important to understand what the possibilities are. Um, Gosh, I could keep asking you questions, but I think we should give people a break. It's stressful. My last question for you is, for a person who is watching this, who is scared and overwhelmed, what is the
Mhm.
one or two most important things they should be paying attention to in the next 48 hours?
That's a great question. I mean, first, I actually wouldn't follow the minute by minute of this. There's a lot of bad information coming out of the region too, particularly on social media. A lot of AI videos that are just not true of
Yeah.
people claiming that it's Iranian responses, and it's just not. So, number one, I would not be really down in the weeds on social media about this. But I think that um, I think I would really follow the media, the BBC, PBS, others who are really following what's happening inside Iran and who are covering what Iranian leaders are saying, because there's a lot of fear mongering about Iran. And some of it's based on truth, and some of it is just fear mongering. I would follow what Iranian leaders are saying. And I think what they're going to be saying is they want to find a way to negotiate an end to this. And I think that should give us some comfort that I don't see the people emerging in Iran talking with really bellicose language or really threatening language. I'm not, coming into this with false hope, but I would really focus on sort of what's playing out inside Iran. And there are a bunch of, BBC, you, others, there are a bunch of people who are covering this. CNN International, I
Yeah.
think, still has folks overseas. A lot of news outlets don't, but people really following this in a responsible way um, to not take the temperature up and don't look at Twitter or X.
Yeah.
I think there's just a lot of garbage on there that's not
Yeah.
even, it gets your anxiety up, but it's also not even accurate.
Yeah.
So,
Do you
you
have
know,
any sense when we might know who the new leadership is? Because I saw some reporting that the IRGC plans to end run the process and install someone quickly. I've seen, no, 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 that's not happened. Like, it's just chaos right now, I'm assuming.
Um,
But
yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there is a process laid out in their constitution. I don't want to rely too much on process here, but I think we'll have a really good sense this week for whether
okay.
that process is moving forward
Okay.
and whether, they're sort of coming together and saying, okay, we've lost a bunch of leaders. Here's what it says we're supposed to do. And you will see the IRGC and others jockeying for power, but I think that we'll have a good sense by this time next week, a week from today, hopefully, about what direction this is going or whether we're looking at regime collapse. I don't think that will happen, but I think we're going to know in the coming week, if I had to
Okay.
guess.
That's great. So helpful. So you've told us, like, let's just take the temperature down and give it like a pause. Let's see what it develops in the next week. Your prediction is that this is a regional war at most. It's not going to expand beyond that. We want to watch for tomorrow when the markets open and gas prices and what
Mhm.
happens with all that. And maybe just breathe deeply and turn off the news every so often.
I mean, look, we're in the news business and it's hard to watch right now. Like we're
Yeah.
all in this together, but also I would watch what the Iranian people are saying and doing. and how they are embracing this moment that is complicated for them, but that does end whatever comes next. It ends a really dark period in their history. And that's not nothing, right? That's significant. So pay
Absolutely.
attention to that too.
Marie Harf, thank you so much for your time today. I am grateful.
I am so grateful. Thank you. It was lovely to chat.
You too.